There are evil people. We're all people of religion, but there are evil people, and we have to confront that. I just give my love and hope to the family of the young woman who was stabbed this morning or last night in Charlotte by a madman, a lunatic. Just got up and started. It's right on the tape. Not really watchable because it's so horrible, but just viciously stabbed. She's just sitting there. So they're evil people. We have to be able to handle that. If we don't handle that, we don't have a country.
In the summer of 2025, a piece of surveillance footage from Charlotte, North Carolina would capture one of the most shocking and senseless acts of violence ever recorded on camera. The video, which quickly spread across social media platforms worldwide, documented the brutal murder of Iryna Zarutska, a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee whose life was violently ended by a complete stranger in what many consider to be among the most random and horrific crimes in recent memory. The footage sparked immediate global outrage, with viewers from every continent expressing their horror, anger, and frustration at witnessing such an unprovoked attack on an innocent young woman. Calls for justice, retribution, and systemic change echoed across social media platforms, news outlets, and public forums as people struggled to comprehend how such a senseless act could occur in broad daylight on public transportation. Iryna Zarutska's story began in Kyiv, Ukraine, where she was born and spent her formative years in what was then a peaceful nation. Growing up in the Ukrainian capital, she developed into a vibrant and creative young woman with a passion for artistic expression and an optimistic outlook on life despite the challenges that would later befall her homeland. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Iryna's world was turned upside down overnight. Like millions of other Ukrainian civilians, she and her family were forced to make the heart-wrenching decision to abandon their homeland, their possessions, and the life they had built in order to escape the indiscriminate violence and destruction that had engulfed their country. The journey to safety was neither quick nor easy. Ukrainian refugees faced numerous obstacles in their desperate flight from war, including dangerous border crossings, overcrowded transportation, uncertain destinations, and the psychological trauma of leaving everything behind. For Iryna and her family, the path eventually led them to the United States, where they hoped to find not just physical safety but also the opportunity to rebuild their shattered lives. After navigating the complex asylum and refugee processes, Iryna's family settled in Charlotte, North Carolina. The choice of Charlotte was likely influenced by the city's growing international community, job opportunities, and relatively affordable cost of living compared to other major American cities. For refugees like Iryna, finding a welcoming community where they could establish new roots was crucial to their long-term success and integration. Charlotte proved to be exactly what Iryna and her family needed. The city's diverse population and growing Ukrainian refugee community provided a supportive environment where she could begin the challenging process of cultural adaptation while maintaining connections to her heritage. Friends and acquaintances who knew Iryna during her time in Charlotte consistently described her as an exceptionally warm, creative, and resilient individual who approached each day with determination and hope. Despite the trauma of displacement and the ongoing grief over her homeland's suffering, Iryna threw herself into building a new life in America. She worked diligently to improve her English, understand American customs, and establish herself within her new community. Her artistic talents, which had been cultivated during her years in Ukraine, became both a source of personal expression and a way to connect with others who appreciated creativity and cultural diversity. By August 2025, Iryna had spent approximately 3 years in Charlotte. During this time, she had made remarkable progress in adapting to American life while never forgetting her Ukrainian roots. She maintained regular contact with friends and family members still in Ukraine, sending money when possible and staying informed about the ongoing conflict that had forced her departure. The combination of gratitude for her safety in America and concern for those still suffering in Ukraine created a complex emotional landscape that many refugees navigate daily. Those who interacted with Iryna regularly noted her ability to maintain optimism despite the circumstances that had brought her to America. She spoke enthusiastically about her future plans, her artistic projects, and her desire to eventually help other refugees navigate the challenges of starting over in a new country. Her resilience in the face of such massive life upheaval impressed everyone who met her. Thursday, August 22, 2025, began as an ordinary day for Iryna. She went about her regular activities, likely including work or personal errands, with no indication that this would be her final day alive. As evening approached, she found herself needing to use Charlotte's public transportation system to travel across the city. At approximately 9:40 p.m., Iryna arrived at the East-West Boulevard station, one of the stops along Charlotte's LNX Blue Line light rail system. The Blue Line serves as a crucial transportation artery for the city, connecting various neighborhoods and providing affordable mobility for residents who rely on public transit. On any given evening, the trains carry a diverse mix of commuters, students, workers, and residents going about their daily lives. Security cameras at the station captured Iryna's arrival and her patient wait for the incoming train. She appeared relaxed and untroubled, likely looking forward to completing her journey home. When the train arrived, she boarded along with several other passengers, finding a seat in the car like countless other riders do every day without incident. The train car that evening held a typical mix of Charlotte residents. Some passengers were absorbed in their phones, others gazed out the windows, and a few engaged in quiet conversations. It was exactly the kind of mundane, everyday scene that plays out on public transportation systems across America thousands of times each day. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested that violence was imminent. Among the passengers already seated on the train was a man wearing a distinctive red hooded sweatshirt. This individual, later identified as D. Carlos Brown Jr., had boarded the train without paying the required fare, though this violation went unnoticed by other passengers at the time. According to witness accounts gathered later, Brown appeared agitated and was observed talking to himself, displaying behavior that some might have found unusual but not necessarily threatening. The erratic behavior exhibited by Brown included mumbling, gesturing, and showing signs of emotional distress. However, such behavior, while concerning, is unfortunately not uncommon on public transportation systems in major cities, where individuals experiencing homelessness, mental health crises, or substance abuse issues sometimes seek shelter or transportation. Most passengers, following typical urban etiquette, avoided making direct eye contact or engaging with someone who appeared to be experiencing personal difficulties. What made this situation tragically different was that Brown's internal distress was about to manifest in an act of extreme violence against a completely innocent person. Iryna, seated in front of Brown, remained entirely unaware of his presence or his deteriorating mental state. She scrolled through her phone, occasionally looking out the window, completely absorbed in her own thoughts and plans. The attack, when it came, was sudden, brutal, and utterly without warning. Brown reached into his pocket and withdrew a folding knife, which he opened with deliberate intent. For a brief moment, surveillance footage shows him appearing to hesitate or contemplate his next action. This pause, lasting only seconds, represents the final moment when this tragedy might have been prevented had Brown chosen differently or had someone intervened. Instead, Brown made the decision to commit murder. He lunged forward from his seat, positioning himself over the unsuspecting Iryna, and drove the knife into her throat with devastating force. The attack was so swift and unexpected that Iryna had absolutely no opportunity to defend herself, escape, or even understand what was happening to her. The initial stab wound was followed by 3 additional knife strikes, each delivered with brutal efficiency. The entire attack lasted only seconds, but the violence was captured in horrifying detail by the train's surveillance system. Iryna collapsed from her seat onto the floor of the train car, mortally wounded and unable to call for help. The immediate aftermath of the attack plunged the train car into chaos. Fellow passengers, who had been quietly minding their own business moments before, suddenly found themselves witnesses to a brutal murder. Their reactions varied dramatically based on their personalities, experiences, and proximity to the violence. Some passengers froze in shock, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The sudden transformation from routine commute to crime scene was so jarring that several people later reported feeling completely disoriented and unable to react immediately. Others responded with fear, moving away from the attack scene and preparing to flee the train at the next stop. However, several passengers demonstrated remarkable courage and compassion in the face of this horrific situation. Despite the obvious danger posed by the armed attacker, some riders moved toward Iryna to provide whatever assistance they could. These good Samaritans attempted to check her vital signs, apply pressure to her wounds, and offer comfort during her final moments. Meanwhile, Brown's behavior after committing the murder was as chilling as the attack itself. Rather than showing any signs of panic, remorse, or urgency, he calmly walked to the opposite end of the train car as if nothing significant had occurred. His casual demeanor in the immediate aftermath of committing murder struck witnesses as particularly disturbing and suggested a complete disconnect from the reality of his actions. During the attack, Brown had somehow injured his own hand, likely when the knife slipped during the stabbing. Surveillance footage clearly shows blood flowing from this self-inflicted wound as he moved away from Iryna's body. When the train approached its next stop, Brown removed his red hooded sweatshirt and used it to apply pressure to his bleeding hand, showing more concern for his minor injury than for the life he had just taken. As the train doors opened at the next station, Brown exited onto the platform while several passengers frantically called 911 from their cell phones. The emergency calls provided dispatchers with real-time information about the attack, the victim's condition, and the perpetrator's description and location. Other passengers fled the train in various states of distress, with some running along the platform seeking police officers or other authority figures. The emergency response was remarkably swift. By 10 p.m., just 20 minutes after the initial attack, police officers and paramedics had arrived at the scene. The first responders immediately focused their attention on Iryna, checking for vital signs and attempting any possible life-saving measures. Paramedics worked desperately to stabilize Iryna, but her injuries were simply too severe. The knife wounds had caused catastrophic damage to vital structures in her neck and throat, resulting in massive blood loss that could not be reversed even with immediate medical intervention. Despite the best efforts of experienced emergency medical professionals, Iryna was pronounced dead at the scene within minutes of their arrival. While medical personnel attended to Iryna, police officers began searching for the attacker based on descriptions provided by witnesses. However, their search was remarkably brief and straightforward. Brown had made no attempt whatsoever to escape from the scene, remaining on the station platform where he had exited the train. When officers arrived at the platform, multiple witnesses immediately pointed them toward Brown, who was still applying his sweatshirt to his bleeding hand. The identification was unambiguous. His appearance matched witness descriptions perfectly, he bore obvious signs of having been involved in a violent altercation, and his behavior was consistent with someone experiencing severe mental disturbance. Brown offered no resistance when approached by police officers. He was taken into custody without incident, showing the same eerie calm that had characterized his post-attack behavior on the train. Near his location on the platform, officers discovered the folding knife used in the attack, still covered with blood evidence that would later be crucial in the prosecution. The entire sequence of events, from the initial 911 calls to the suspect's arrest, occurred within approximately 10 minutes. This rapid response time was fortunate in terms of securing the perpetrator and preserving evidence, but tragically came too late to save Iryna's life. The impact of witnessing such brutal violence proved traumatic for several passengers. At least one witness required transportation to a hospital emergency room after suffering a panic attack brought on by the shocking nature of what they had observed. The psychological aftermath of such experiences can persist for months or years, requiring professional counseling and support. In the hours following the arrest, investigators worked to identify the perpetrator and begin piecing together his background and possible motives. The suspect was identified as D. Carlos Brown Jr., a 34-year-old man with no fixed address who was known to be experiencing homelessness in the Charlotte area. As investigators delved into Brown's background, a troubling pattern emerged that raised serious questions about systemic failures in both the criminal justice and mental health systems. Brown's criminal record stretched back more than a decade, documenting a progression of increasingly serious offenses that should have triggered more intensive intervention. Court records showed that Brown's first arrests occurred in 2011, marking the beginning of a lengthy involvement with law enforcement that would span the next 14 years. Over this period, he accumulated convictions for multiple serious felonies, including robbery with a dangerous weapon, breaking and entering, and felony larceny. These crimes demonstrated both a willingness to use violence and a disregard for others' property and safety. The robbery with a dangerous weapon conviction was particularly significant, as it showed that Brown had previously used weapons to threaten or harm innocent people. This prior pattern of armed violence should have been a major red flag when combined with his later mental health issues and erratic behavior. For these various crimes, Brown served approximately 6 years in the North Carolina prison system before being released in September 2020. However, his time in prison appeared to have had little rehabilitative effect, as he continued to accumulate charges and demonstrate problematic behavior after his release. In September 2022, Brown was arrested for attacking a woman, though specific details of this incident remain limited in public records. This attack occurred less than 2 years after his prison release and demonstrated that he continued to pose a danger to public safety, particularly to vulnerable individuals. The most revealing incident in Brown's recent history occurred in January 2025, just 8 months before he would murder Iryna. During this incident, Brown was arrested for misusing the 911 emergency system, but the circumstances of this arrest provided crucial insight into his deteriorating mental state. According to police reports and court documents, Brown called 911 during what appeared to be a severe psychotic episode. When officers responded to his call, Brown explained that he believed someone had placed artificial materials inside his body that were now controlling his basic functions, including when he ate, walked, and talked. This delusional belief system represented a clear break from reality and indicated serious mental illness. Medical professionals and family members later confirmed that Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that can cause hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. Schizophrenia typically emerges in early adulthood and requires ongoing treatment with antipsychotic medications and therapy to manage symptoms and prevent dangerous behavior. Brown's mother and other family members acknowledged that he had struggled with mental health issues for years and that they had repeatedly attempted to get him appropriate treatment. However, navigating the mental health system proved challenging, particularly for a family dealing with someone who had both criminal history and severe psychiatric symptoms. Following his January 2025 arrest, Brown appeared in court where a public defender raised questions about his competency to stand trial. The attorney's concerns were based on Brown's obvious psychological impairment and his inability to understand the legal proceedings or assist in his own defense. A judge agreed that Brown's mental state warranted evaluation and ordered a comprehensive psychiatric assessment. This competency evaluation was meant to determine whether Brown understood the charges against him and could participate meaningfully in his own defense. If found incompetent, he would typically be sent to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment until his mental condition improved sufficiently to allow him to stand trial. However, in a tragic failure of the system, this crucial psychiatric evaluation had not been completed by August 22, 2025. Despite his history of violence, his diagnosed mental illness, and a court order requiring assessment, Brown remained free in the community while awaiting the evaluation that might have identified him as a danger to public safety. This delay proved fatal for Iryna. Had Brown received timely psychiatric assessment and treatment, he likely would have been hospitalized or at least more closely supervised, preventing him from being alone on a train with potential victims. The systemic failure to prioritize mental health evaluations for individuals with Brown's profile represents a breakdown in public safety that contributed directly to this tragedy. While Brown's arrest was swift and straightforward, the investigation into Iryna's murder required careful documentation and evidence collection to ensure a successful prosecution. Crime scene investigators spent hours combing through the train car and station platform, photographing every detail and collecting potential evidence. The surveillance footage from the train proved to be the most damning evidence against Brown. The high-quality cameras had captured every moment of the attack from multiple angles, providing irrefutable proof of Brown's guilt and the premeditated nature of his actions. The footage showed him removing the knife from his pocket, opening it, pausing briefly, and then launching the attack without any provocation from Iryna. Forensic technicians collected the murder weapon and swabbed it for DNA evidence, though Brown's fingerprints and blood on the knife made his connection to the crime undeniable. They also documented the blood spatter patterns throughout the train car and collected samples for laboratory analysis. The investigation confirmed what witnesses had already reported. There had been absolutely no interaction between Brown and Iryna prior to the attack. They had never met, had no mutual acquaintances, no social media connections, and no shared history of any kind. The murder was completely random from Iryna's perspective, though it may have been motivated by Brown's internal delusions or psychological disturbance. Investigators also examined Brown's activities in the hours and days leading up to the murder, looking for potential triggers or explanations for his violent behavior. They confirmed that he had boarded the train without paying the fare and had been observed talking to himself and displaying agitated behavior, but found no evidence of drug intoxication or external provocations. The release of surveillance footage and details about Brown's background triggered intense public outrage that extended far beyond Charlotte to encompass national and international audiences. The combination of Iryna's status as a war refugee, the random nature of the attack, and the clear evidence of systemic failures created a perfect storm of public anger. Social media platforms were flooded with expressions of rage, grief, and demands for justice. Many commenters noted the tragic irony that Iryna had escaped the violence of war in Ukraine only to be murdered in the country where she had sought safety. This observation struck a particular chord with refugee advocates and supporters who had worked to provide safe havens for Ukrainian families. The public's anger intensified significantly when details emerged about the Charlotte City Council's response to the murder. Just days after Iryna's death, the council held a meeting ostensibly focused on discussing transit safety in light of the brutal killing. However, the meeting was interrupted when council members paused proceedings to celebrate a member's birthday with cake. The timing and optics of this celebration were catastrophically poor. A photograph of the birthday cake was posted to the council's official social media account with a caption that read, "Here's the cake," followed shortly by another post stating, "Cake time is over." Charlotte City Council is now starting its discussion of the fatal stabbing. This sequence of events struck many observers as profoundly tone-deaf and disrespectful to Iryna's memory. The juxtaposition of celebrating with cake while supposedly addressing the brutal murder of a young refugee woman generated widespread criticism and calls for the responsible council members to resign. Beyond the immediate outrage over the council's behavior, Iryna's case raised broader questions about systemic failures that had enabled the tragedy. Critics pointed to multiple points where intervention might have prevented Brown from being in a position to harm innocent people. The criminal justice system's failure to adequately monitor Brown after his release from prison, despite his history of violent crime, represented one clear breakdown. His pattern of escalating offenses should have triggered more intensive supervision or intervention programs designed to prevent recidivism. The mental health system's inability to provide timely evaluation and treatment for someone with Brown's obvious psychiatric needs represented another critical failure. The months-long delay in conducting his court-ordered competency evaluation meant that he remained in the community despite being potentially dangerous to himself and others. Public transportation security also came under scrutiny, with questions about whether better monitoring systems or intervention protocols might have prevented the attack or limited its impact. The fact that Brown had boarded the train without paying and was displaying obviously disturbed behavior suggested possible opportunities for intervention before violence occurred. Following his initial medical treatment for the minor hand injury sustained during the attack, Brown was formally processed through the criminal justice system. He was charged with first-degree murder, the most serious homicide offense available under North Carolina law, which carries the potential for either life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Brown was booked into the Mecklenburg County Jail, where he was held without bond pending trial. The decision to deny bail was based both on the severity of the charges and on concerns about public safety given Brown's obvious mental health issues and history of violence. Within a week of the murder, a grand jury had reviewed the evidence and returned a formal indictment against Brown for first-degree murder. The speed of this process reflected both the strength of the evidence and the public pressure for swift action in such a high-profile case. However, the question of Brown's mental competency immediately became a central issue in the legal proceedings. Given his documented history of schizophrenia and the psychotic episode that had led to his January 2025 arrest, the court ordered another competency evaluation to determine whether he could understand the charges against him and assist in his own defense. This evaluation process could potentially delay trial proceedings for months or even longer if Brown is found incompetent and requires treatment to restore his ability to participate in legal proceedings. If he cannot be restored to competency within a reasonable time frame, he might be committed to a psychiatric facility indefinitely rather than standing trial. Assuming Brown is found competent to stand trial, his defense team faces significant challenges given the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The surveillance footage provides incontrovertible proof of his actions, and multiple witnesses can testify to his behavior before, during, and after the attack. The most likely defense strategy would involve an insanity plea, arguing that Brown's schizophrenia prevented him from understanding the nature of his actions or distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the murder. North Carolina recognizes the insanity defense, though it requires clear and convincing evidence of mental illness that substantially impaired the defendant's capacity for rational conduct. If successful, an insanity defense would result in Brown being committed to a secure psychiatric facility rather than prison, though he would remain confined indefinitely until deemed no longer dangerous. This outcome might satisfy public demands for Brown to be permanently removed from society while acknowledging the role of mental illness in the crime. Alternatively, Brown's attorneys might negotiate a plea agreement in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. Such an agreement would likely involve Brown pleading guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a guaranteed sentence of life imprisonment without parole. Given the heinous nature of the crime and the public outrage it has generated, many observers believe that prosecutors should seek the death penalty if Brown is found competent to stand trial. North Carolina has not executed anyone since 2006, but the state retains capital punishment for the most serious murders, and Iryna's case appears to meet all criteria for death penalty consideration. While the legal proceedings against Brown will undoubtedly continue to generate attention and debate, those who knew Iryna are working to ensure that her memory encompasses more than just the tragic circumstances of her death. Friends and community members have organized memorial services and fundraising efforts that celebrate her life, her resilience, and her contributions to the Charlotte community. A GoFundMe campaign established to help Iryna's family with funeral expenses and potential costs of repatriating her remains to Ukraine has received donations from around the world. The international response reflects both sympathy for her family and anger over the senseless nature of her death. Iryna's story serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by refugees who have already endured tremendous trauma and loss. Her journey from war-torn Ukraine to a new life in America represented hope and resilience, making her random murder all the more tragic and senseless. The case has also highlighted the urgent need for better coordination between criminal justice and mental health systems to prevent similar tragedies. Brown's history clearly demonstrated the dangerous combination of violent criminal behavior and untreated mental illness, yet the system failed to provide adequate intervention or supervision. As Charlotte and the broader community continue to grapple with the implications of this tragedy, Iryna's memory serves as both a call for justice and a reminder of the preciousness of human life. Her death should not be in vain if it leads to meaningful reforms that protect other innocent people from similar random acts of violence. The surveillance footage that captured her final moments will likely be referenced in policy discussions and legal proceedings for years to come, but her true legacy should be the creativity, courage, and hope she brought to everyone fortunate enough to know her during her brief but impactful life in America.